The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. How 146 women burned. And New York looked away. March 25th, 1911. A Saturday afternoon in Greenwich Village. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory occupied the top 3 floors of the Ash Building on Washington Place. 10 stories tall, supposedly fireproof. Modern construction, safe. Inside 500 workers, mostly young women, mostly immigrants, were finishing their shift. Italian girls, Jewish girls from Eastern Europe, some as young as 14. They had been sewing shirtwaists since 7 that morning. 12-hour days, 6 days a week, for $6. At 4:40 in the afternoon, someone smelled smoke. Within 18 minutes, 146 of them would be dead. Burned alive behind locked doors, crushed in stairwells, jumping from 9th floor windows and splattering on the sidewalk while horrified crowds watched. It is the deadliest industrial disaster in New York City history. And here's the part that should haunt you. Every single death was preventable. The owners knew the building was a death trap. They knew, and they did nothing. Because keeping the doors locked was more profitable than keeping the workers alive. This is the story of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and the story of how New York's richest men literally got away with murder. To understand what happened, you need to understand what the Triangle Factory was. This was not some small sweatshop. Triangle was one of the largest garment manufacturers in New York. They made shirtwaists, women's blouses, the most fashionable item in 1911. Every working woman in America wanted one. The owners were Max Planck and Isaac Harris. Russian Jewish immigrants who had built a fortune in the garment trade. They called themselves the Shirtwaist Kings. And they ran their business like kings, which is to say like tyrants. The factory occupied floors 8 and 9 and 10 of the Ash Building. 500 workers crammed into those 3 floors, mostly young women ages 14 to 23, immigrants who spoke little English and desperately needed work. The conditions were brutal. Rows of sewing machines packed so close together you could barely walk between them. No ventilation. Windows nailed shut to prevent what the owners called air theft. They believed fresh air made workers lazy. In summer, the temperature hit over 100 degrees. The floors were covered in fabric scraps and lint and cotton dust. Incredibly flammable. Fire inspectors had warned Blank and Harris multiple times. They did nothing. Workers sat for 12 hours straight. No breaks, except a brief lunch. If you needed to use the bathroom, you had to ask permission. And supervisors would sometimes say no, just to assert power. And the doors. This is important. The doors were locked, not all of them. The main freight elevators were accessible, but the stairwell doors locked from the outside. The owner's excuse was theft prevention. They claimed workers were stealing fabric and sneaking out early. So they locked the doors and made everyone leave through one exit, where supervisors could check their bags. Fire marshals had told them this was illegal. The city had laws requiring unlocked exits. Blank and Harris ignored them. They paid the fines when they got caught, usually about $20, and kept the doors locked, because $20 was cheaper than losing inventory. Saturday, March 25th, 4:40 in the afternoon. A fire started on the 8th floor. Nobody knows exactly how. Probably a cigarette dropped into a scrap bin or a spark from one of the machines. Does not matter. In a factory filled with cotton fabric and lint, it only takes a spark. Within seconds, the entire 8th floor was engulfed. The workers on 8 had maybe 2 minutes to react. Some ran for the stairs. Some ran for the elevators. Some tried to use the fire hoses mounted on the walls. The fire hoses did not work. The valves were rusted shut. They had not been inspected in years. The phone system did work, though. A supervisor on the 8th floor called the 10th floor and screamed, "Fire! Get out!" But nobody called the 9th floor. Why? We will never know. Maybe the phone lines were already down. Maybe in the chaos they forgot. The 9th floor had no warning. By the time the workers on 9 realized something was wrong, smoke was pouring up through the stairwells and the fire was climbing the walls. They ran for the exits. The Washington Place stairwell door was locked. The Green Street door opened inward, and with hundreds of women pushing against it, in panic it would not budge. They were crushed against it, trampling each other, screaming. Some managed to squeeze through to the roof. About 70 people made it that way. They were saved by New York University law students from the neighboring building who laid ladders across and pulled them to safety, but most did not make it to the roof. The fire was too fast, the smoke was too thick, and the doors were locked. Down on the street, crowds had gathered. Fire trucks arrived. Firefighters unrolled their ladders. The ladders only reached the 6th floor. On the 9th floor, women appeared in the windows, faces pressed against the glass, smoke billowing behind them, flames licking at their hair and clothes. They started jumping. One girl. Witnesses said she could not have been more than 15, climbed onto the windowsill. She looked down at the crowd. She crossed herself, and she jumped. She hit the sidewalk and died instantly. Then another jumped, and another. The firefighters tried to catch them with safety nets, but the women were falling from 90 feet up. They hit the nets so hard they tore right through and smashed into the pavement. One firefighter tried to catch a girl in his arms. The impact broke his shoulder and killed her anyway. People in the crowd started screaming at the women not to jump, but what choice did they have? Burn alive or die on impact? Those were the options. Some jumped in pairs, holding hands. Friends who had worked side by side for years, choosing to die together rather than alone. The New York Times reported that the sound of bodies hitting the pavement was so loud it could be heard blocks away, a sickening thud. Over and over. 54 times. 54 women jumped to their deaths. The rest burned. The fire was out in less than 30 minutes. The firefighters went inside. What they found was hell. Piles of charred bodies against the locked doors. Women who had clawed at the wood until their fingers bled, then suffocated from smoke or burned when the ceiling collapsed. Bodies in the stairwells, trampled and crushed in the stampede. Bodies at the sewing machines, burned so badly they were fused to the metal chairs. And outside on the sidewalk, 54 more, broken, shattered. Some with their skulls split open. Some with their faces still recognizable. Frozen in terror. The morgue at Bellevue could not handle the volume. They set up a temporary morgue at a pier on 26th Street, lined the bodies up in rows. Families came to identify them. Some were so badly burned that identification was impossible. They used jewelry and clothing scraps and anything they could find. One girl was identified by the shape of her teeth. 7 bodies were never identified. They are buried in a mass grave in Brooklyn. The final count: 146 dead, 123 women and girls, 23 men. The youngest confirmed victim was 14 years old. Her name was Kate Leone. She had been in America for 3 months. The oldest was 43, Providenza Pano. She had worked at Triangle for 5 years and had 4 children, all dead, all preventable. 2 weeks after the fire, Max Blank and Isaac Harris were indicted on manslaughter charges. The charge: they had locked the doors which directly caused the deaths. First-degree manslaughter. If convicted, they could get 20 years in prison. The trial began in December 1911. It was a circus. The prosecution brought forward survivors who testified that the doors were locked. They brought forward fire inspectors who had cited Triangle for violations. They had documentation showing Blanc and Harris knew about the locked doors and refused to fix it. The defense? They argued the doors were not actually locked, or if they were, the workers should have known better than to panic. They blamed the victims. Their lawyer was Max Stoyer, the best defense attorney money could buy, and he was brilliant in the most disgusting way possible. He put a survivor named Kate Alderman on the stand. She testified in broken English and through tears about watching her friends burn to death, about trying to open the locked door, about the horror. Stoyer made her repeat her testimony, word for word, 3 times. Then he pointed out to the jury that her story was exactly the same each time. Same words, same details. Obviously, he said she had been coached. She was lying. The jury bought it. Blanc and Harris were acquitted. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Survivors screamed. Family. Members of the dead rushed the defendants. They had to be physically restrained. Blanc and Harris walked out of the courtroom free men. It gets worse. After the trial, the families of the victims filed civil lawsuits, wrongful death claims. They wanted compensation. The insurance company that held the policy on the Triangle Factory building did an investigation. They determined the fire was caused by negligence, so they paid out. To Blanc and Harris, the factory owners had insured the building and its contents for $200,000. After the fire, they collected the full amount, plus another $60,000 from a second policy. They made $260,000, about $8 million in today's money, from the fire that killed 146 of their workers. The civil suits from the victims' families went forward. After 2 years of legal battles, the families won. The court ordered Blank and Harris to pay damages. The amount? $75 per victim. Not $75,000, $75 total. Most families settled for less. Some got as little as $40. Blank and Harris paid the settlements and went right back to business. They opened a new factory, same industry, same business model, and in 1913, just 2 years after the Triangle Fire, they were caught again, locking the doors. Same violation, same illegal practice. They paid another small fine and kept operating. Max Blank died wealthy in 1942. Isaac Harris died wealthy in 1954. Neither ever expressed remorse. Neither ever admitted wrongdoing. They literally profited from mass murder and faced zero consequences. But here's the thing. The Triangle Fire did change something. It changed the law. The public outrage was so massive that politicians could not ignore it. Labor unions rallied. Protests filled the streets. Frances Perkins, who witnessed the fire and later became President Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor, made it her life's mission to prevent another triangle. Within 2 years, New York passed 36 new laws regulating factory safety, fire exits, sprinkler systems, unlocked doors, maximum occupancy limits, inspections. Other states followed. The federal government eventually stepped in. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration was created decades later, but its roots trace back to Triangle. Every fire code, every emergency exit sign, every sprinkler system in every building you have ever worked in. Those exist because 146 women burned to death in 1911, and people finally said enough. But let us be clear. Those women did not die for progress. They died because rich men valued profit over human life. The reforms came after, built on their corpses, and only because the public demanded it. Blank and Harris would have kept locking those doors forever if they had been allowed to. The Ash Building still stands. It is at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street in Greenwich Village. It is part of New York University now, renamed the Brown Building. There is a small plaque on the exterior. Most people walk past it without noticing. On the 6th floor, above where the ladders could reach, there is a memorial, a historical marker, some photos. That is it. Every year, on March 25th, a small group gathers outside to read the names of the dead. 146 names. It takes about 15 minutes. The rest of the year, the building is just another New York University classroom space. Students take exams in rooms where women once burned alive. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire happened 115 years ago. But the lesson is timeless. When companies say safety regulations are too expensive and too burdensome and too much government interference, remember Triangle. When politicians argue that we need to cut red tape and let businesses regulate themselves, remember that 146 women died because the owners decided that a $20 fine was an acceptable cost of doing business. Remember that the doors were locked on purpose, that the fire hoses did not work because maintenance was expensive, that women jumped from the 9th floor because staying inside meant burning alive. And remember that the men responsible got rich, walked free, never faced justice. That is the real story of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Not a tragedy, a crime. And New York let them get away with it.